Bringing a full slate of entertainment to Farmington and San Juan County. The Spirit Coalescent, the multimedia. "11 minutes past 8 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, April the 7th, 2022. Good morning, I'm Scott Michlin, and thank you for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM over the airwaves, of course, here in San Juan County, New Mexico. Over the rest of the places on the earth from our website, KSJE.com. You can listen to us live, of course, streaming from our website. And also, it's a visual radio program. This is a community-supported visual radio station, so the video stream is heading out to the KSJE social media pages, our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and our Twitter account. We are glad that you were with us this morning, everybody, because coming up, our continued conversations with archaeologist Paul Reed about the greater Chaco area and its impacts and relationships to Native Americans in the region. That's coming up in the next few moments with another special guest who I'll introduce very shortly. So I hope you'll stay tuned for that discussion on KSJE this morning. Next hour, of course, Mick Hess is going to be here roving with the arts. It is our weekday classical music program. Mick is playing Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring on the air today. You'll hear that after the news. Next hour at 9:06 on KSJE. Don't forget, we invite you to connect with us on our Instagram page in addition to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And if you're a podcast person, you can listen to KSJE Podcast for free wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check it out on popular podcast platforms, places like iTunes and Spotify and all the others, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Pandora. Subscribe for free and take us with you and maybe discover a new favorite program from KSJE. Weather forecast, a sunny morning here in the Four Corners outside our studios at San Juan College. It is 40 degrees at the moment. We're expecting a mostly sunny day, not quite as windy today, but still a little breezy. The high reaching 64 this afternoon. Clear overnight with a low of 29. More sunshine tomorrow with a high of 69 on Friday, 35 for an overnight low, and then on Saturday, mostly sunny skies again. The high 76 with an overnight low of 46 before the winds pick up again on Sunday and Monday with highs in the mid to upper 60s and overnight lows in the 40s with maybe another chance of showers in the forecast developing Monday night on into Tuesday. Well, let me introduce my guests who are joining us this morning. Again, back for his regular visit. Archaeologist Paul Reed is here from Archaeology Southwest in Salmon Ruins. Paul, good morning. Good to have you on the show once again.
Good morning, Scott. So glad to be back on with you.
Welcome back. Good to have you here. And also, I want to introduce our other guest who is with us this morning, and that is Reyaun Francisco. Reyaun, good morning to you. You are an Associate Environmental Justice Director for the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us as well. And so to get us started, Reyaun, maybe you can talk a bit about the work that you do and maybe kind of educate all of us on the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project in case we're not familiar with it.
Yes, of course. Jag är daisnot angesh Reyaun Francisco insha arunanish lenige nakidanish long kini bashinachin maidej gijni dashiche akut ego jananish lang akut ego she Reyaun Francisco insha. Although I am the Associate Environmental Justice Director with Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, where we work to ensure that historically and deliberately excluded communities have access to the outdoors and land management process through education, advocacy, and people empowerment. We work to, and we have been working in on this project for Chaco Canyon because it means a lot to our indigenous peoples across the Southwest, and it means a lot to me. This is my hometown and where I was born and raised, and where I spent a lot of time thinking about how important it is and how blessed we are to be Diné, and how our ancestors are still there watching over us and connect us with the physical, spiritual, and environmental worlds.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation and wonderful introduction. I appreciate it very, very much. Paul Reed, let me come to you now because as folks maybe who are familiar with our discussions, we've been talking this year about the efforts to kind of talk to local indigenous peoples and their connections to Chaco. And Archaeology Southwest has been very involved in reaching out to these different organizations and pueblos and tribes to get their insights on the greater Chaco area. And so talk to me a bit about how Reyaun fits into this discussion and the work that you are doing.
Yeah, well, sure, Scott. As you know, and as your listeners know, we've been in this for almost a decade now, working with a variety of different environmental partners, with indigenous partners, to ensure that Chaco Canyon and this zone that we really are concerned about around Chaco is protected from, unrestrained development of different types. Primarily now we're talking about oil and gas development. And, as we've noted frequently on the show, Chaco Canyon is a National Historical Park. It's protected, but we can have development literally right outside Chaco's boundary. So this is something that many, many folks have been concerned about for really a long time, not just on this decadal scale. So we were thrilled as part of the larger Chaco coalition that our organization has been part of to have Nuestra Tierra, join us last year, and I'm thrilled to have met Rayan and been fortunate to work with him on a couple of projects. We have an upcoming film that I'll talk to you more about maybe the next time we have a show, but Reyaun was part of that, and we had a number of Pueblo leaders down in Chaco and in Greater Chaco last month, really just talking about those issues and trying to key in specifically right now on BLM's process to withdraw about 351,000 acres around Chaco in, several different zones that are, going to protect the irreplaceable resources, the people who live on the lands right outside Chaco. And again, as we've talked on the show, Scott, for me, this is in part about buffering the national park, but it's really about protecting the people who live on the land and the sites that are within, this zone around Chaco. Chaco has, I believe, something like 3,500 known archaeological sites and cultural sites. I personally suspect there's probably more, and I understand from talking to my friends at the park that they're going to initiate a broader cultural survey at some point in the next few years. Outside Chaco, if we look at the territory, it's much larger because of the way the zones have been set up for protection. There are about 4,200 known archaeological sites, and this is with a cultural inventory percentage of about 15%. So this suggests that there might be 20,000 additional, cultural sites, traditional places, important to indigenous people, historic sites that we don't even know about and haven't yet been protected. So, so this is kind of a multi-layer thing that we've been talking about over, these few years. But thrilled to have Reyaun and Nuestra Tierra, in our partnership circle. And we do a call every week with our Chaco coalition to talk about the issues and kind of see where we're going, both individually and as a larger organization.
Right. And so there is an update a little bit, I think, too, from the BLM, correct, about some of their comment period about extending the zone, if you will, around Chaco Canyon. And so that was a decision recently by the BLM, isn't it?
Yeah. The good news is, that the period for comment would have ended yesterday on the 6th of April. So they were asked by different indigenous groups to extend that for more time, for more meetings. And so we have now until May 6th. And they've also put a couple other meetings on the docket. They're going to have one in Albuquerque, which I think will be really better suited regionally for some of the pueblos and tribes that are more centrally located there, and another meeting in Farmington as well. So I think that'll really help get the voices that we need to hear about this process, get those into the formal record. So yeah, we're definitely thrilled for that. And then we have more time to talk to folks about why protection of this area is so critically important.
Right. Reyaun, let me come to you with that similar question, if you don't mind, about this extended comment period. And so with the work that you do and getting out to some of the fellow members of the Navajo Nation, of the Dene, to speak their minds about this proposal to limit or stop development in that 10-mile radius around the Natural Historic Park at Chaco Canyon, what's kind of the reaction that you get when you're talking to folks?
Yeah, it's very different depending on who you're talking to. Um, the I feel the greater Navajo Nation is in support of this 10 miles of ancestral protections. As Scott mentioned, a lot of what we don't know is still out there about our ancestors and about the life that they lived. And it's important for future generations to be able to see the power and resiliency of being Dene or being Pueblo or being an indigenous person in the Southwest. And this is why it is critically important that we don't allow oil and gas corporations to have their way in destroying um, irreplaceable artifacts, irreplaceable memories of our ancestors that still live within this area and we've yet to discover. And I think it is super important that in this engagement process, the Bureau of Land Management works to ensure that Indigenous communities are fairly represented in the comment period, and that they make meaningful engagement in these communities and ensure that the public is educated in their native language and in English, and that there is an attempt to educate people where they are at chapter houses, at community meetings, to ensure that people are getting and receiving accurate information to make a sound determination that this is worth protecting and that this is only affecting federal lands and not allotee lands, state lands, or the other statused lands in the area, private lands, so that it is that we protect our ancestors. That's really what the point here is that this is 10 miles of ancestral protections, and it is long overdue, and it is important.
Good point. And a good point I think you make as well about the BLM, of course, only able to manage these federal lands. There are still, as Paul Reed and I have discussed numerous times, in this checkerboard area, which literally is a checkerboard, there are all other types of land as well, which would not be part of these protections. And so that's an important distinction, I think, to make. And Rayan, I have another question for you, and that is just the importance of having a seat at the table in some of these conversations. Again, Paul and I have talked in the past too about kind of the embarrassing past of maybe not reaching out to indigenous peoples, and some of these really important decisions are being made about the land and these areas that are so important to many of these cultures. And now it seems like there's more of an effort to reach out and to have folks at the table and as part of these decision-making processes. How important is that to you?
It's greatly important. This is a huge decision being made for Indigenous peoples, and for us to not be included would be a continued just horrificness to horrific stance to take, right? And it is why that so many Native organizations have prospered to be engaged in this process and have Native people represented in coalitions. Sometimes I still find myself to be the only Indigenous person in the room, which is not a great feeling, and which needs to change. And I think for the Bureau of Land Management, it is important that sovereignty is understood, and that the tribal consultations, the Honoring Chaco process, makes that attempt to include Indigenous communities, frontline communities to oil and gas sites into this conversation, and to work with them and engage with them in a meaningful way. And I continuously say meaningful, and what that I feel means to me is making deliberate attempts to reach and outreach to Navajo community members and their hogans at chapter meetings, in community events, to relay information that is accurate rather than having community members listen to information that is propagated through the Navajo Nation government by oil and gas corporations. And it is important for the Navajo Nation government to also, or for tribe, pueblos, and nations governments to include their own people into this conversation. As speaking from the Diné perspective, our Navajo Nation government has taken stance in support of oil and gas corporations, even though community members have said that we've had enough, that our health has been impacted severely, that future generations' health have been impacted severely, that in our lifetime and in their lifetimes, the pollution, the air pollution, the water pollution will not see a solution. So it's important that both the federal government, tribes, pueblos, and nations government work to ensure that their frontline communities, the indigenous communities living within these areas impacted by these decisions have meaningful engagement, deliberate engagement, to have them understand what is happening, what the process is like, and continuously outreaching to them to have their input and say into what is, or what this decision should be. And if that happens, then I feel we'll see more of our people understand and want to see these protections. And that is why it is super important for us as Indigenous peoples to be included in processes like these.
Thank you. And we should point out, we're talking about this 10-mile area around the Greater Chaco, or the Chaco Canyon Historical Park. There is also another proposal about a 5-mile radius that I think some of folks in the tribe have endorsed, at least the Navajo Nation, correct? And so that's a bit of a mixed message, right? We're talking about two kind of different things, right? But I guess both feel that there should be some greater area of protection. I guess that's the one commonality between the two proposals.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. The Navajo Nation government proposed a 5-mile withdrawal in the area. The All Pueblo Council of Governors has a resolution to support 10 miles, and community members within the Greater Chaco area want 30 miles to ensure that their health is protected, because they know and have experienced these health concerns. And so what the current proposed 10-mile buffer is what a lot of us are advocating for, but we do want to see more protections in the future and more studies in the future to really understand the impact that oil and gas industries have had in these communities. And just because they're not allottees or they're not elected officials should not mean that their voices aren't represented and reflected in this process. And that is why, again, it is important to meaningfully engage, deliberately engage with these frontline community members and assess the health impacts that have happened and the overall health of the land in the area, the environment, and really center ourselves with this 10 miles of ancestral protections.
Thank you very much. And we should remember too that there are families that live in that area, within the area that we're talking about, right, within that 10-mile zone, whether it's on a different part of land, a different part of the checkerboard, those types of things. But there are folks that are living in that region that we're talking about. Paul Reed, let me come back to you and ask you a bit about kind of the work that you do. And you mentioned there may be as many as 20,000 sites in this area that we are talking about. And I know a lot of folks in the oil and gas industry would say, but there are rules, aren't there, when they want to go into a certain area, any area, to do drilling, or they think there may be oil or gas, and they have to do a study anyway to determine if there are sites in the proposed area that they want to drill. That's part of existing law, isn't it?
That's right, Scott. one point I wanted to make about the 10 mile, just because,
Okay.
as Reyaun said, some folks would like to see it, be at 20 or 25 or 30. And, whereas the Navajo Nation is advocating for 5. So I think what's important for listeners to understand is that 10 miles is a compromise that has been really carefully worked out now. I myself have been in discussions with folks from probably mid 2015 to now. So we're talking about 7 years of discussions, and the Navajo Nation has previously supported this. So, there were 2 meetings, 2 continuous years, 2017, 2018, with President Manali first in 2017, and currently, seated President Nez in 2018, saying that 10 miles is a reasonable amount of protection. We can debate whether it is, but we had agreement on this. So there has been some movement in this position, and I just want folks to understand sort of that evolution through time. The other thing to understand, as we get closer to Chaco Canyon, the processing time to get oil out of the Manco Shale Formation, the one that's being tapped for this, the active part of this field, gets much more involved and much more expensive. So I think even from an industry standpoint, the best lands are not close to the national park, and this is something that I think it'd be great if we could have an honest and transparent discussion with industry about whether there's really any point in trying to exploit Manco Shale deposits that close to the national park when the cost is going to be so much higher. Excuse me.
Sure. Understood. My guest, local archaeologist Paul Reed, is joining us this morning along with Reyaun Francisco. He is an associate environmental justice director for the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project here in New Mexico. And Paul, just if you wouldn't mind going back to my other question about there is a rule on the books, right, that you have to, these organizations, these corporations have to do a site survey of potential impacts to sites before they even put anything in the ground, don't they?
Right. The National Historic Preservation Act and sort of the implementing regulations, which, is under Section 106 of the Federal Code, requires archaeological and environmental work prior to developments on any federal lands, a lot of state lands in different states, or if federal money's involved. So there's a process that's gone through, and it works through BLM. If it's BLM lands, it works through BIA and Navajo Nation. And basically archaeologists and environmental folks go out and assess areas before the development happens. So, these are protections that are in place. Many of us feel that these are inadequate because in many cases, sites will be identified, boundaries will be determined, and then if necessary, there may be temporary fencing put around a cultural resource to protect it. But then an oil and gas facility can literally go in 100 feet away. And then on the other side, you could put another oil and gas facility. You could run a pipeline through. So the idea here is that through time, this fragile and very important ceremonial landscape of the past gets intruded upon by an industrial landscape. And that's what we see just north of the 10-mile zone as we go up towards Farmington, is more and more oil and gas infrastructure intruding on ancient cultural landscapes. So, and, if we look at the existing laws, especially under the National Environmental Policy Act of 1972, additional work is required to understand those landscapes and to protect them. So what's happening right now at the agency level is a fairly minimalistic approach to protecting the cultural resources on the ground. And of course, this doesn't even get to the health and safety of people who have to live next to oil and gas infrastructure. So what we've advocated, over this decade or so now with BLM and with BIA is much more of a landscape approach to looking at where we're going to see lands developed. And when leases are proposed for different areas, we've pushed to have tribes involved heavily when they're ready to be. And this is, I think, something that has improved through time, so that tribes and indigenous groups can weigh in and say, this area is very sensitive to us, and we would like to consider ways to remove some of these parcels from leasing and just not have them considered at all. Whereas over here, perhaps this is an area that, we could negotiate and figure out where the oil and gas infrastructure should go. So the idea is not to stop oil and gas development, it's to put it in places that don't harm people living on the land and that away from sensitive cultural landscapes. And this is something that really is, unfortunately, kind of a new idea in Northwest New Mexico. We've pretty much had oil and gas develop and corporations come in and put wells almost anywhere they wanted to. They do this minimal avoidance for cultural resources, but again, over time, this landscape has seen tremendous impacts. And those are things that we're really seeing. This oil field is almost 100 years old. And I think it passed 100 years at this point. So we've got 100 years of cumulative effects, and we really need to start thinking harder about how to manage this, how to protect people on the land, and how to set aside some lands that are probably marginal for oil and gas development anyway, but have very important and sensitive cultural resources. So that's kind of where we're at.
Understood. And I guess it probably goes back to economics, doesn't it? As the price of oil gets higher and has been higher, anyone who's in business would probably look at some of these more marginal fields and say, well, now it may be cost effective to go into these areas, and that's maybe part of your concern.
Well, right. But if the yields aren't sufficient to really put much more oil into our markets and gasoline around for purchase, we're not really helping anyone is the bottom line. And maybe we're increasing oil and gas profits, but the cost of that seems pretty high to me and to many of the folks we talk to and our partners.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Reyaun, let me come back to you a little bit about, again, these ongoing conversations. And again, to be clear, just to remind everyone, there is currently open comment period from the BLM about federal land and this 10-mile buffer area around the Chaco Canyon National Park. And that's kind of what we're talking about this morning. As Paul Reed mentioned, this is more of a 10 miles is not necessarily an arbitrary number, but it's a compromise number from other proposals that have been put out. And so it seems like 10 miles has some consensus among the indigenous populations that are in that area, the Navajo Nation, and others who we've learned also claim some affinity and connection to Chaco Canyon. Is that what your organization tries to explain as well to other folks about the vast numbers of other indigenous peoples that can trace some of their lineage back to Chaco or have Chaco as part of their very important cultural history?
Yeah, it's super important to acknowledge that the greater Chaco region served as a hub in the past. Our ancestors all gathered in these areas for prayer, for trading, and for being in community together. A lot of indigenous communities, even from South America, were able to come to this great landscape and trade with the indigenous communities in the area. And history, and archaeology has told us that, right? All roads lead to Chaco, and it's important to all indigenous peoples across the Americas to acknowledge that shared history and how important it is for all of us to continue to learn from this landscape and acknowledge all of our connections to Nihemani or Mother Earth, and to this wonderful place. And there is public comment periods opened until May 6th, and in-person public comments happening the 27th and April 27th and April 9th, or 29th, April 27th and April 29th in Farmington and Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Got it. Very good. And you're right, Paul Reed and I have talked numerous times about the vast trading networks that went in and to and from Chaco Canyon, and it's amazing. It really is a special site for sure, and I know a lot of folks, it has a special place in a lot of folks' hearts, indigenous and non-indigenous alike. We are just about out of time today, but Reyaun, if folks would like more information about the work that your organization does, what's the best way for them to find out? Website, Facebook, what would you suggest?
All social media and our website. You can find us at Nuestra, Nuestra Tierra, Tierra.org. Very good. Thank you very, very much. And Paul Reed, again, the work that you and I talk about continues, and I imagine that I know Archaeology Southwest, has been very vocal about at least getting the word out and making folks have their voices heard about how they feel one way or the other about these types of issues, about Chaco and anything else, right?
Well, right. As we've talked, Scott, our organization is trying to really lift up Indigenous voices much more in the work that we do, whether in cultural work, archaeology, or education, or advocacy. And so I'm thrilled to have connected with Reyaun and his organization, and to continue the work that we're doing, and to really make folks aware of just the deep ancestral connection that Indigenous people have to landscapes across New Mexico, but in particular right around Chaco. This is a World Heritage Site. The U.S. has 22 on the books right now. I think several others are being considered, but this is an amazing landscape, and it deserves a much stronger level of protection. And that's pretty much why we're in this. I think that's why Reyaun and Nuestra, Tierra, and all our partners are in this. This is a place that we cannot afford to lose.
Very good. That's true. And we'll leave it there this morning, everyone. But thank you very much for joining me, Paul Reed, Rian Francisco. Thank you both for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again in about another month, Paul Reed. And thank you very much, everybody. My guest this morning here on KSJE. KSJE is supported by the Durango Bluegrass Meltdown, April 17th, 18th, and 19th in Durango, Colorado. The Meltdown features walkable indoor venues with Bruce Molsky and Tony Trischka, Special Consensus, Unspoken Tradition in A.J. Lee, and Blue Summit. There'll be an old-time barn dance, band contest, workshops, jamming, and bluegrass in downtown bars. Find out more at DurangoMeltdown.com. KSJE and San Juan College present the Student Success Coaching Tip of the Week. Week 11, study with friends and study groups. Encouraging friends to study with you can make everything more fun and productive. Ask your classmates to study with you at a certain time and location. Studying together in person can help you hold each other accountable too. You don't want to be that person who cancels or doesn't show, right? Teaching a friend or family member or even your pet the material is a great way to see how well you know it. When you explain it to someone else, you'll have a better grasp of which information you already have mastered and which information you need to study. The Student Success Coaching Tip of the Week, presented by KSJE and the Student Achievement Center at San Juan College.